Have you ever watched your phone light up with an incoming call, and instead of answering it, your hand instinctively flips the screen face down? Maybe your heart beats a little faster. Maybe you think, "I'll call back later," and later somehow never comes. If that sounds familiar, let me tell you something right away. This isn't just about being rude, lazy, or antisocial. There's a whole psychology playing out inside your brain in that tiny moment between the ring and your decision not to answer. Most people assume that avoiding phone calls means you're shy, anxious, or bad at communication. But the reality is far more interesting, and honestly, far more human. Because the psychology of people who avoid phone calls isn't about disliking people. It's about how your mind processes control, uncertainty, emotional energy, and time. Think about the last unexpected call you got. Not a scheduled one. Not a casual chat you mentally prepared for. Just a sudden ring. What went through your head? Was it, "What do they want?" or "Do I have the energy for this right now?" Or maybe even, "I'm not ready to be on." That split-second reaction is where the story begins. Phone calls are strange when you think about them. They demand your attention immediately. There's no warm-up, no preview, no way to read tone before jumping in. A text waits patiently. An email sits quietly. But a phone call barges into your mental living room and turns on the lights without asking. For many brains, especially reflective or sensitive ones, that feels invasive rather than efficient. If you avoid phone calls, your brain likely values psychological boundaries more than most. You might not even realize it, but you're highly attuned to transitions. Shifting from whatever mental space you're in, focused work, quiet rest, emotional processing, into a live conversation can feel like slamming the brakes on a moving car. It's jarring. Your nervous system notices. Neuroscientists talk a lot about cognitive load, which is basically how much mental effort your brain is using at any given moment. Phone calls are high load. You have to listen, process, respond, manage tone, read pauses, and think ahead, all in real time. There's no edit button, no pause, no chance to say, "Let me think about that for a second," without it feeling awkward. Text-based communication, on the other hand, gives your brain breathing room. You can read, reflect, choose words. That's not avoidance. That's self-regulation. And here's where it gets interesting. People who avoid phone calls are often deeply considerate communicators. They care about how they come across. They care about saying the right thing. And because they care, they don't want to be caught off guard and half present. They'd rather respond later with clarity than respond now with confusion. There's also an emotional layer we don't talk about enough. A phone call is emotionally ambiguous. Until you answer, you don't know if it's good news, bad news, a request, a conflict, or something that will drain you. Your brain hates ambiguity when emotional energy is involved. So it hesitates, not because you're afraid of people, but because your mind is trying to protect your emotional resources. Psychologists sometimes describe this as anticipatory stress. The stress isn't the call itself. It's the unknown meaning behind it. And if you've had experiences where calls often led to pressure, conflict, or responsibility, your brain remembers. It learns. It quietly associates ringing phones with emotional labor. This is especially true for people who grew up being the responsible one, the fixer, the listener, the one others called when they needed something. Over time, your nervous system learns that calls equal obligation. So now, even a harmless ring can trigger a subtle stress response. And then, there's the performance aspect. Phone calls require immediacy. You're expected to think fast, respond smoothly, and emotionally match the other person in real time. For reflective thinkers, that feels unnatural. Your brain prefers depth over speed, meaning over immediacy. You might be the kind of person who, hours after a conversation, suddenly thinks, "Oh, that's what I should have said." That doesn't mean you're bad at communication. It means your brain processes insight after reflection, not during rapid exchange. In a way, avoiding phone calls is your mind saying, "I work best when I have space." There's also a fascinating cultural shift happening here. Historically, phone calls were once considered intrusive too. In the early days of telephones, people found it rude that someone could suddenly demand their attention from afar. Society adapted, but not everyone's nervous system evolved at the same pace. In today's world, where constant availability is normalized, people who avoid phone calls are often quietly resisting a culture of instant access. They're not trying to disappear. They're trying to choose when and how they connect. And that choice matters. Research on autonomy shows that people feel psychologically healthier when they perceive control over their interactions. Phone calls remove that sense of control. Text restores it. For some personalities, that difference is everything. Now, let's talk about introversion, but gently. Because avoiding phone calls doesn't automatically make you introverted. Plenty of extroverts hate phone calls too. The key difference is stimulation preference. Calls are intense. They compress emotion, information, and attention into one uninterrupted stream. If your brain prefers pacing, small doses, breaks, silence between thoughts, calls feel overwhelming. It's not fear, it's sensory management.
There's also something deeply human about wanting to be seen on your own terms. When you write a message, you show a curated version of yourself. When you answer a call, you show the raw, unedited you. And that vulnerability, for thoughtful people, feels intimate. You might not want intimacy on demand. Here's the reframe most people never hear. Avoiding phone calls is often a sign of emotional intelligence, not deficiency. It shows awareness of your limits. It shows respect for communication quality. It shows that you don't want connection to be sloppy or rushed. Of course, avoidance can become a problem if it's driven by fear rather than preference, if unanswered calls fill you with guilt, if you replay them in your head, if you avoid calling even when you want to. That's a different conversation, often tied to anxiety or negative past experiences. But for many people, especially in a world that never stops ringing, choosing not to answer is a form of self-trust. Think about it this way. Your attention is one of the most valuable things you own. Phone calls demand it instantly. People who avoid them are often people who've learned, consciously or unconsciously, that attention is precious. They want to give it fully, or not at all. And maybe that's the real psychology here. It's not about disconnection, it's about intentional connection. So the next time your phone rings and you hesitate, don't rush to judge yourself. Ask a softer question. What does my brain need right now? Silence, preparation, space. Your answer might tell you more about your inner world than any personality test ever could. If this topic made you feel seen, or if you recognized yourself in these moments, take a second to reflect on it. Maybe even share your experience in the comments. What goes through your mind when your phone rings? And if you enjoy exploring the hidden patterns behind everyday behavior, consider staying here a little longer. There's a lot more your mind wants to understand about itself.